Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us here at Software Sales Simplified, Move to Success, your stop for all of the latest and greatest with respect to selling techniques, methodologies, and learning how to become a better and more effective seller, whether you are brand new to enterprise software sales, or if you are an old salt like Matt and I. Join us every week to learn about how we can become better sellers together. So with that having been said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very excited to introduce my esteemed colleague, Matt Long. Matt, hello, sir. Hello there, sir.
Hey, everyone. Nice to be with you again.
Good to have you here as always, sir. We are joined this week by Sara Levinson. Sara, if you'd be so kind, please tell everybody who you are and what your background is.
Thanks, Kevin, and thanks, Matt. Thank you both for having me. I'm Sara Levinson. I am a strategic account executive. I've also been a VP of business development. Now I'm a head of strategic accounts. All the different ways to say that for a long time, I've been an individual contributor in software sales. I have exclusively worked with enterprise accounts in all of those different roles. And I'm currently with a company called Claravine, which is a Series B marketing technology company. I joined them on October 1st, so still pretty new, but a really exciting space. I'm working with retailers and financial services companies and beyond. So happy to be here.
We're so happy to have you. And, both Matt and I have had the distinct privilege and honor of having worked with Sara in the past. And I can personally testify to her sales acumen and her abilities as a sales professional and an all-around nice person, which is really cool to be able to add to it as well. Now, with respect to that, Sara, one of the reasons why we brought you on today, and we were hoping you'd be able to share some stories with our audience, you've got a very interesting background. Your sales journey has been very dynamic. Maybe you might share a little bit about what that's been like for you.
Yeah, I think I'll start with saying I never wanted to be in sales. I was raised by a salesperson. My dad is since retired, but he was a sales professional for my entire childhood and most of my adult life. And at the time, those sales roles were not kind of more cushy, like where you had bases. They were commission only sales roles.
Wow.
And this was sort of like, pre the SaaS world. And I saw the pressure that was there for my dad as a quota carrying professional with two small children. And I used to say to my dad, I'm never going to be in sales like you.
So why did you get into sales if that's not what you were going to do?
For a long time, I worked in nonprofit sector, actually. Then I worked at a newspaper when I got out of graduate school. And my path crossed with this woman who was a very senior executive at IBM. And she kind of led the global partner business, and she lived in the UK, but I ended up meeting her in Pittsburgh, and she asked me what I wanted to do with my life. And I told her that I was really interested in getting more into marketing roles, which I was genuinely interested at the time. So we started talking about IBM, and I said, would you ever sponsor me, to kind of interview for a marketing role at IBM? And she kind of started to mentor me. And then eventually she told me that she would only refer me if I tried a sales role, and that there was an inside sales role open at Unica, which IBM had at the time just acquired. And I said, no, I don't want to go into a sales role. I want to stay in marketing. And she said, well, you can try anything for a year. And if you try sales for a year and you don't like it, then I'll put you back in marketing. But let's see how it goes. And it went really well. I was on the enterprise marketing management in that whole kind of like division of IBM. I met lots of people from Tea Leaf, lots of the folks that you guys know. And just kind of got into that role and really fell in love with sales. And it just kind of took off. And when I was in that inside sales role, I guess to kind of talk about like the journey of how I kind of came into these outside roles, like I just remember in that inside sales role being so impatient to get in front of customers. I thankfully worked with one rep who had come from Unica. He was part of the acquisition, who is still a mentor of mine today, Lane Fuller. And he invited me to some customer meetings with him. Even as an SDR, I went to some customer meetings, which was like not something I think was approved, in the larger IBM structure. But he really coached me and took me to some of those meetings. And I started just being really interested in an outside sales role. As it turns out, I didn't do that at IBM. I left and did that at ClickTeal for my first role. But as soon as I was in outside sales, it was just like, yeah, this is what I'm meant to do. This is a passion for me. So that's how it came to be that I ended up in sales.
That's quite an interesting transition. And by the way, having worked at IBM, that phrase "just give it a year" is kind of a mantra there. That's used that gets pulled out of the woodwork quite often. I'm curious. Okay, so you're in marketing, you're happy, you're working there, and then you get this opportunity to move over into sales for some pretty enticing reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But what did your mentor there see? What was it about what you were bringing to the table where she was like, no, I got to hook this person up with a sales opportunity to really understand what they can do? What was it about? Did she ever share that with you?
Yeah. So it was a couple of things. I think in the interview process with her, it was clear that I'm somebody that really enjoys building new relationships. I genuinely enjoy curiosity about other people. I just told someone the other day, I've never been on a plane where I don't know the life story of the person next to me. I'm not necessarily the person who is like, hey, I want to talk. I don't do that, but I don't know. People naturally open up to me. I'm the person who finds myself listening to someone's life story when I didn't plan on that necessarily happening.
Right.
And so I think she just kind of noticed those traits about me. And I like to have conversations with people I've never met. That old saying where they say an introvert's worst nightmare is walking into a room where they have to meet 100 people. That is my dream. That's the greatest day for me, is to walk into a room where I don't know anyone and there's all these new people I can meet. And so I think that was there. And also Melinda, the woman I'm referring to, she was very passionate about getting more women into those sales roles. And so she noticed, I had the chops, which I'm sure she, hiring and firing lots of people in her career, I'm sure she noticed, that the raw skills were there. And when I started, I was one of the only women on my sales team, and that trend has gotten better, but continued. And so her early mentorship was, really important for my career. Yeah.
What were some of your biggest challenges, do you think, early on in your sales career that you needed to overcome or just encountered, I guess?
Yeah. I want to describe it as a desperate fear of failure. I think it was the combination of being so young when I started at IBM. I think I was 24 when I started as a inside sales rep, and I probably looked like 18, so I came off as young. I was young, so it was the double whammy of being the youngest person in the room and then being one of the only women in the room and feeling like I cannot fail at this, because if I fail, it means younger people can't do sales and women can't do sales. So there was this abject fear of failure that was an early struggle for me. And it took me a long time to be in deals and get up the confidence that I was actually perhaps not an imposter who was going to be caught. Today, I finally feel oh, I know what I'm doing now. I'm good at this. But early in my career, it was am I good at this? Soon they're going to find out that I'm not good at this. And I'm just a goofball who plays ukulele and, doesn't really know a lot about sales. But it's once you're in this many deals and I got the experience, it took me a while to kind of go beyond my natural confidence and have confidence as no, I understand strategy. I have good insights about business. I can advise senior level people about making technology decisions. So that was an early struggle. And I think the other one was, and I've talked about this before, but early experiences with burnout. In my first outside sales role, it was a small company, as you both know, and I was working, I would estimate probably 70 to 80 hours a week when I was, the second or third rep in North America. And that's just what I thought you had to do. The only way I thought I could succeed was to outwork everyone. So that's what I did. Did that result in success? Yes. Did it also result in a lot of side effects that were undesirable? Also, yes. So I think it was figuring out there are ways to work smarter and also take care of myself
Right.
Those lessons took me a longer time. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Getting back to the failure thing, because I think we've all struggled with that at
Yeah.
some point, right? But there's the existential fear of failure in general, like my life, my career, everything's a
Yeah.
failure, right? But then there's also, as a salesperson, you encounter failure on a daily or weekly basis, right? And they're minor failures, but you don't get the call, you don't get the next step, you don't get this. How were you kind of differentiating between those two, and how did you leverage your experience to really keep advancing forward?
Yeah, so at the beginning of my career, when I would lose the deal, it was incredibly personal, and it was an incredibly emotional response that I had because I was very emotionally invested in the outcome, which I think was just a lack of experience, but also just like part of who I am. Part of who I am is that I do get emotionally invested. So I still have an emotional reaction, particularly when I lose a deal that I've worked on for a long time.
Mm.
Although I've been able to shorten, I got rejected this morning by something I worked on for a couple weeks. And it's like, I used to read emails like that and be devastated at the beginning of my career. And now it's like, I see them, it's like, okay, on to the next one. So I'm not perfect at it, but I think learning to separate myself from the outcome was also a very powerful skill as I gained experience because first of all, I'm not even talking about the idea of coming to a deal with desperation. I don't know that I did that in my career, but I certainly came with a lot of emotional involvement, which can actually weaken you in a negotiation or in an engagement with a client. So I've done a lot of personal work to separate myself from the outcome. And I think one of the coolest things about sales is that it's a roller coaster, but it's a roller coaster. Like, roller coasters are, scary and dangerous and whatever, but roller coasters are really fun. Like great roller coasters are really fun. So for me, I was always so bored in these like traditional 9 to 5 jobs where there was only so much I could do to kind of change the prospects for my future. But in sales, when you put in that same amount or more effort, that's usually reflected in the outcome. That's the thing about it that I really enjoyed. And you have to just know that there are going to be ups and downs. And I think part of learning to deal with that is learning what energizes you, learning what takes away your energy, learning what it excites you, learning what's better to work on in the morning versus the afternoon. It's all just experience that comes with being in a lot of deals. And sure, I wish I had it at the beginning, but I have more of it now.
So there must have been, I mean, and by the way, totally get the whole imposter syndrome thing too, because
Yeah.
I didn't start out in sales or pre-sales either. I came from engineering and services delivery. And there's that, what am I doing here? You feel uncomfortable in your own skin. But there had to have been some sort of a tipping point. Maybe it was a deal or some sort of an interaction that you had at some point early in your career that made you go, oh, no, this is where I need to be. Did you have something like that that kind of shaped your path afterwards?
I think for me, the defining moment was a little bit later. I mean, certainly there were moments in my first outside sales role where I got the confidence and signed big clients and thought, yeah, I know what I'm doing.
Mm.
But I think the moment when I became what I would call like a consultative seller or, more senior in my ability to work on bigger deals, kind of like the transition to work on multi-million-dollar engagements versus smaller engagements, was when I worked at LivePerson and I worked with Sean Burke, who was our sales leader there. And we were in engagement with a retail customer. Sean coached me on using this phrase that was my recommendation would be. Instead of saying, hey, you should use our software because XYZ. You need our software because XYZ. Instead of that, dear Mr. C-level executive or Mrs. C-level executive, if I were in your shoes, this is what I would do. And in order to be able to make that kind of statement, you better have really studied their business and understand their problems. And in this case, I had earned the right to make that statement. So I remember very, very vividly walking into this meeting, which was with the CFO. And Sean had suggested that I say this. And I looked across the table at the guy and I said it. And he took my recommendation and they signed the agreement. And then I was in future meetings and C-level people started to say to me, is that your recommendation? What would you do? So I was going into those subsequent meetings with it, not only a different level of confidence, but with, like, hey, I spent a lot of time learning this business. Of course I have an opinion about it. Like, you guys have been in engagements where you know enough about their technology that you would say, this is what I would do if I were you. And you can make that recommendation. So I think for me, that was the turning point when I started to feel like I could sell in a more consolidative way. And that led to just me selling bigger and bigger deals from there. So I hope that answered your question, Kevin, but that was more the moment.
No, that's spot on. I mean, consultative selling, doing your homework, and being able to speak with authority and empathy to a prospect, definitely, I mean, it's tried and true, and it is definitely a step of maturation in your professional development. Now, that's still there nowadays, and everybody would say that's, if you're not doing that, you're probably not being the most effective seller in the world. But a lot of other things have changed, right? And not over like a long period of time either. The way that people sell these days and what's happening in the industry has really transitioned over, I'd say, even the last 5 years. What are some of the biggest shifts that you've seen and how they've affected your ability to be an effective seller?
Yeah, so I think the most obvious one for me was when my travel ceased to exist for a year during the pandemic. And then business travel has kind of returned, but not quite in the same way it was before the pandemic. So now you have to get good not only at digital selling, but I forget where I read this, but it's such an important thing to remember. When you used to go to more meetings on site, and of course we're still having on-site meetings, but we're not having as many as we were. We're having these pre-meetings on Zoom, and then maybe we'll go see the client in like the third or fourth meeting when it's getting more serious or more involved in the deal. When you used to go to meetings on site, when you left the room, the customers would all sit there talking about whatever you just described, right? They're debriefing while you're in the elevator going to lunch or whatever. Right. Now, people are just on back-to-back Zoom calls, or there is no debriefing and they just hang up. And then maybe they get back to your project in a week when they have some meeting scheduled about it. So you as a seller have to facilitate the internal discussion of your deal. So that means being much more rigid about, okay, I'm over here keeping a sequence of events, or you don't even have to call it that. Let's say it's just a tracker. And I've done this with clients where we signed the NDA, we looked at a proposal, we had discussion with this person. This is just bare bones, having something that tracks, these are the steps of my deal. But for much more complex, much larger enterprise engagements, I've had things, team captains, where the person on who's kind of like Kevin or Matt's peer on the technical side at the client side, Kevin becomes the team captain and they go meet with the client role on that side who's in whatever technical role, or our CTO has to meet with their CTO, or there's a team captain for systems integration, or there's a team captain for customer success. You get the idea, but having a team on our side that mirrors the team on their side, so that I then become the person, I hate sports analogies, save me from this, but I get to really be the quarterback who is facilitating these relationships, but the customer doesn't have to manage all the work of buying, which, by the way, buying is harder than selling. It's like way harder.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting observation about, the differences with COVID and video conferencing now. I mean, we know that it's harder to build rapport and trust and all those types of things, remotely. That's evident. But then I forgot about, when you go on site, there's the prior 10 minutes where you're meeting the person and you're talking to them as you're walking the maze of rooms to get to the conference room. And then afterwards, the 15 minutes of them walking you out, and I guess stop to use the restroom, and then the AE's talking with them, and they're planning the next
you get
thing.
a little feedback maybe on what the people in the room thought of you.
Totally missing. It's even missing internally with, because we hop off a call with the AE, and then without even being able to debrief, right? We're like on to the next call or the next meeting or whatever. And so a lot of things get dropped. So I think that's a really good observation, as well as a way to kind of combat that. in this new
Yeah.
kind of selling environment. What else have is there anything else that you've seen that's changed or in your approach to deals now or opportunities that either as you've advanced in your career or just you've seen changes over time?
I mean, it bears mentioning all the AI tools that are available to sellers now. I think, and this is my personal opinion, I think it's very dangerous to be sending out messages to clients that are AI generated. And believe me, I've tested some of this myself. I'm very curious about how well these AI tools can write a summary email or an outreach email to a prospect about XYZ business problem, event, whatever you want to say. Where I think AI can help sellers most is in the research for accounts, actually. Like that's
Absolutely.
what how I'm personally using it is how can I scale? Okay, I have 25 to 50 enterprise accounts that I need to start educating myself on right now. And what are their strategic priorities? And I've got to read their financial reports. And like, I used to manually do all of that stuff and, go line by line reading their financial reports. And like, I still do some of that, but I can scale myself very quickly with some of the tools that, Sales Navigator has, other AI platforms, Gong and all the features in Gong of like, how can I summarize this call and what were the key points? I mean, that is invaluable to a seller to be able to get to those quicker insights so that I can actually use my brain for the important task, which is like, how do I personalize this experience? How do I create a good buying experience? How do I shepherd my client through this experience of buying? How do I mobilize the teams? All that good seller stuff. That's what you should actually be doing. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. And then I think the other big thing that has changed in sales is that buyers are coming to the table. I forget how the phrase is, but they're 70% done by the time they talk to the salesperson. They've already read all about your company and the competing companies. They already know a lot about your solution. They know why they need it. And then they're getting to you. So by the time they've gotten to you, the only way you can really differentiate yourself now is the experience that you create as the seller. That's it. Because even if you don't think your competitors are as good, you can't really change whatever the customer has, whatever opinion they've formed in that research, unless you create a buying experience that is different, that is personalized to their business and their approach. Like, I think for me, I feel like I always tried to create that experience, but I stay hyper focused on what is going to make me stand out as a salesperson or our company stand out as a company to do business with versus the alternative. Because regardless of climate, economics, all the software that's available, people want to work with people that they like and trust. And people are emotional beings who make emotional decisions and they back it up with data. So I try to stay focused on keeping the human, me, in the sales process. So I'll leverage AI, but I'll never it's never going to be me. So it's a balance.
I know that your career has been interesting in that you've gone from company to company, but not necessarily in the same vertical or,
No.
In the same space. So that I think offers some unique challenges. How have you been able to kind of ramp quickly in a completely new space with a completely new value prop and different customers? What's that been like and how have you been able to accelerate that?
Yeah, that is something that I did kind of deliberately, just out of genuine curiosity. I think it strengthens you as a seller to learn a space that you haven't been in. I would say that let's use the largest learning curve as an example, which was when I went from traditional marketing SaaS. I was at LivePerson during the pandemic, and then I went to Prometric, which was an educational technology company. It was a certification company that, hosted and administered exams. And that was a completely different space. It felt like a big learning curve because I had to not only learn educational tech, but I also had a completely different buyer. I was selling to people who were academics and PhDs and nonprofits versus a Fortune 500 CEO, CFO. These are very different personality types. So the way that I got up to speed there, and I do this in any company when I'm learning a new product, is I think that reps should, even individual contributors should have a 30, 60, 90 plan, just like an executive does. Like a great rep, if you're hiring a great rep, they're going to have that. So like, I think of the first 30 days as learning and listening, just like an executive would. But in my case, I'm listening to calls that the other sellers are doing. I have always made it a point to learn to demo the software that I sell. Do I have to be able to demo as well as you two? No. But if I meet someone for coffee, I should be able to have a kindergarten level demo or some type of technology that I can speak to with confidence to give them kind of initial taste, so that when I have a time to get them in front of the product, then I can bring Matt on, but they already have some context. So this was controversial in a lot of organizations. Initially, I would get pushback that was, wait, you're a seller. Why do you want to know how to demo? But if I can't demo it, how am I supposed to sell it?
Yeah.
So that's one way, was I really made it a point to know how to demo, know how to use the product. And then I would schedule in that learning period one-on-one calls with people in the organization that had a reputation for being great at what they do. And I don't care if they're a seller, if they're the head of product, or if they're like, some senior architect in a different part of the company. Like, I want to talk to them if they're good at their job and ask them questions about the product and about the technology and about the value. So I think for me, it was just never coming in with this ego that I've seen some sellers come in with, where it's like, well, I have all this experience, so yeah, I can sell this product. It's like, hold on, let's talk to the people who have been doing a great job. I remember when I started at ClickTail, like Amir and Odette and Ellie and everyone that was there, I walked into a room with them and I just said, I need you guys to teach me what you do. I need you to help me, because I'm not going to succeed without you. So I think if you come without ego and expectation and you listen to the folks that are there for the first 30, 60 days, then you get to have an opinion and do it in your own way. But for me, that helped. And then when I worked in new spaces, I read books about it. When I started at LivePerson, I started reading about conversational AI and messaging, and I didn't know that space at all, zero context. So I just started reading about as much material as I could before I started. And I think in sales, that's a general principle. It's like, you have to stay a student. And the second you stop doing that, like, you're already behind. So yeah, those are the things that helped me.
I was just about to ask, because there were so many key points that you hit up there as great bits of advice to any seller, particularly if they're now crossing over into a new vertical or working with a new type of technology they've never known before. I was going to ask you the question, to be a good seller, do you need to be a good student? And you actually said it right there at the end of it.
Yeah.
So that was amazing, because one of the things that Matt and I have brought up in our methodology is the concept of engagement, which in fact was just the last session that we just did. And it's that ability to create an understanding with the customer. And that becomes the blueprint for how you're going to deliver value. If you're not presenting to them in a way that it envelops confidence, that you get it, you understand what they need to do, your plan to them for success delivery is going to be suspect in their eyes. So I love that if you're going to put your finger on what's the most common mistake or common mistakes that sellers are making today in the industry, because Matt and I do a whole show on it, but what would you say they are?
So I'll just make a general statement first, which is that to be a great seller, like, you have to really care.
Empathy.
You have to care about people. You have to care about being different. You have to actually care about and believe in the problem that your product solves. And I'll give you an example from an engagement that I worked on at the educational company. So I told you that, we delivered exams. That was our business. So I was in an engagement where we were trying to win the business of a very, very large global exam, which we did win. But the customer cited as one of the reasons we won that I actually sat for the exam. I sat for the exam, which had no relevance on anything I'm going to go do in the future. I didn't earn a certification. I actually had to sign a paper that my scores would not be released. But I sat for that exam. And I was the only salesperson that had ever done that. And like, that was a suggestion that our sales leader made at the time. But there are sellers who, if he had suggested that, would say, what are you talking about? You know, that exam was 3 hours. I sat there for 2.5, 3 hours and took the exam. But for me, when I came out of the exam, I had the experience of their customer. And like, nobody could take that from me. So it becomes a very different conversation. And you can do this in retail. You know, of course, there's exceptions to every rule, but as I've worked with retail over the last, 10 to 12 years, I go into these stores and have experiences with these brands. One of the first emails that I had success with as a little SDR was I was a Sephora customer, as I have been for a long time. And I was a frequent Sephora customer. And I sent a prospecting email to the senior vice president of marketing, and she read it, and I got the meeting. Because in the email, I put, these are the 3 things wrong with how you market to me. Like this, and this. I would be spending this much more money if you would do this, and this. And it was a specific experience that I had with their brand, which is very different than sending somebody a note that says, we're saving X dollars with this company and you could do that too. It's like, no, tell me how you're going to change my customer experience. Go have the experience with the brand. So I think the scenarios where you can do that helps. And I think that the other mistakes that sellers make is, and that's why I said it's a hard job, is thinking that there's shortcuts, thinking that there's ever a silver bullet in sales. Right now, everybody thinks AI is the silver bullet. It's not. The best thing about sales is that it's a constantly changing profession, and there literally is no solution to becoming the ultimate master of sales. It's like the career that can never be mastered, because the second you get to what feels like mastery, the whole industry changes, software changes, buying changes. Like, 5 to 10 years ago, there weren't big buying teams. Now buying teams are like 20 some people, 17 to 21 people in some cases. So it's just constantly evolving. So I think as a seller, you have to be doing the same, and knowing that there's no hack is like the way to keep yourself sharp.
Yeah, I mean, these are all really fantastic points, Sarah. I'd
Oh,
talk to you
thanks.
we could have you back for another session for sure. I do want to move on a little bit though, and make sure we touch on the topic of just, being a woman in software sales, which has traditionally been predominantly male dominated.
And still kind of
On the
is.
technical side, but I have seen a lot more female sellers over my career, and worked with a lot of them as well. So I'm just curious about your experience along that way. You've been in for 15 plus years. I'm sure you've seen some changes just in that area alone. But what has been some of your observations as being a woman in a predominantly male-oriented business?
So I actually first want to say the positives, which is that there have been so many men that have positively influenced my career and helped to build my career and sponsored me in rooms where I was not in. The men who have been my sales leaders, who gave me those opportunities, folks such as yourselves who supported me, in actual engagements and never questioned that I had the chops just because I'm female. So for every experience that I've had where I felt not included, I've had equal or more experiences where I met, wonderful, supportive, great mentors who were men who sponsored my career. So I want to first say that, because I think it's important to recognize that. And I think a reality for women, whether we'd all like to talk about this or not, is that as a woman in sales, I needed men to sponsor me. So if those men had not done that, I would not have made it as far as I have, simply because women are not typically given as many opportunities in the C-suite, in sales leadership, or for whatever reason, having families, having children, not wanting to travel. There's a litany of reasons that it's more challenging to have a career as a woman in a role like this one. So I just want to give credit where credit is due there. And then I think on the flip side, what is challenging for women, and I just had this conversation with someone earlier today, is that when you're selling as a woman, and I said this at the beginning when we were talking about failure, I definitely feel as if I'm selling for all women. So when I lose a deal or I lose an engagement, it's like, well, I hope nobody perceives that like women can't do this because I can't do it. And I've started to move away from those feelings. But early on, there was a lot of judgment, early in my career of other women who maybe weren't as successful as me or needed more at bats or could have used a lot more coaching. And instead it was just like, well, yeah, she's a little soft. So, probably can't be as ruthless. And I do think what helped me, and again, I don't know if this is positive or negative, but I'm a really direct person. I'm really forward. I grew up watching ESPN instead of the news a lot because I only had a brother. And so I'm comfortable in these spaces. I never felt like I didn't belong there. But I think a lot of challenges still exist for women to feel like they are welcome in those spaces. And I love the initiatives like you're saying, Matt. I think a lot of work is being done. I would call out Lori Richardson, who has been one of my mentors for a long time, who is a huge advocate for women in sales and is really focused on bolstering that community. You've seen lists over the last few years. Here's the top women you should have on your sales panel. So I think work is being done. But for me, where I see opportunities to mentor women or pull them into those sales roles, I do that whenever I can, which I think is one way that, I can make sure more women get exposed to and involved in this career. By the way, the data is there that women outsell men. Just saying. So
I know that you've been very involved in a number of different mentorship programs. And I know that you've met one of our other podcast guests at one of those events as well. So I'd love to have that story eventually someday. But what you were describing, I feel like I'm selling for all women. That's got to be an almost oppressive and almost suffocating kind of burden to be carrying. It must impact in some degree your positively and negatively your ability to perform, number one, but also now that you've had to go through that gauntlet, is that something you talk about in your mentorship with people that you're communicating with?
Yeah, because I think that having that thought, it's not realistic, right? Of course, it's not a representation of reality, but I think it's an interesting thing to reflect on for women who are starting in that role, knowing that they're coming into it with, I'm a minority in this space. So I feel like I'm going to be watched a little bit more closely. I need to be a little bit more careful about how I approach things or what I do or my sales approach. I think for women in sales, it's like, think about the qualities we think of when we think of salespeople: tough, aggressive, forceful, demanding, like all these adjectives that, if you've raised girls or you have daughters, like
I have two.
Right. Like your daughters probably don't think of those words as feminine. So I think it's kind of challenging just by being a woman in a sales role. You're like challenging this traditional notion of what a salesperson is. But for me, even outside of male or female, I've always tried to challenge all those notions because I think people just want to buy from other people. So I think being yourself is the most powerful thing that you can do in any sales role because people are looking for authenticity. So I try not to, I don't feel like I carry that burden anymore. But yes, when I mentor women, I caution them about the early signs at the beginning of their career, or what I would call exit gates, where most women who start in sales have an experience with a bad boss or a bad work environment, and then they exit. It's like getting them to not exit because, as I said, there are supportive work environments. There are great men who can mentor you and support your career. So I try to share my experiences of the positive to remind them that it's not a universal experience just because you get some duds.
One more question just around being a woman in sales, and I don't want to stereotype as everyone, of course, is different. But do you think there's times where if the person you're selling to is a woman, that gives you a certain either camaraderie or connection or things that not to use to your advantage, but helps a little bit with that process?
So this is a delicate answer, but I think it's a really important question. So for me, it's the opposite, actually, Matt. It's much harder for me to sell to women. And I think there's a couple factors at play. And again, not universal. I've had some lovely experiences working with women and vice versa. But I think part of the way women are socialized is what we just talked about, right? Oh, there's only so much space. There's only so many female spaces on this team. And so women have to compete with each other, or they think they have to compete with each other in certain environments in order to get attention, in order to get a voice at the table, in order to get promoted into whatever job, because probably they're going to be compared to 3 other men who are up for the role. So in the experiences where I've had a negative experience selling to women, it's because they were threatened that there was another woman in the room telling them how they ought to solve a business problem.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, the way I was direct was usually well received by men because I was being very direct. So I think it just depends on the environment. But I do think I made a joke about women being better at sales than men and the data. But the truth is, it's because women naturally have a little bit more empathy and they have a little bit more antenna for like what's happening in a boardroom at a table. Like we're all having a discussion about the software, but like I'm noticing that person X at the end of the table seems really angry and like hasn't talked this whole meeting. Wonder what that's about. Well, guess what I'm going to do? I'm just going to ask. Like, hey, you haven't said much. What are your thoughts on this? In my experience, I've found, and I've worked with almost exclusively female SEs, and like, same thing. We just tend to notice things that not necessarily all men would miss, but women are just maybe more naturally attuned to. So I think that's part of it too. It's like pluses and negatives on both sides. Everybody has strengths
all
and
around.
weaknesses. Yeah.
Really interesting. I didn't really consider that side of it, but it makes sense now that you said it. I felt the same way around just representing all long-haired hippies in sales, in tech sales as well. If I fail, all of us are going to fail.
All the hippies. Yeah, totally.
I would love for us to keep going. And I agree with Matt. I'd love
Same.
to have you come back for yet a second session because you hit on so many things where I was like, I'd love to go deeper into that, but we're trying to keep this to 40 minutes. Before we wrap up for the session today, if you were going to give one piece of advice to a new seller, what would you give them right now?
Be yourself, be authentic. I think there's so much, maybe it's like the onset of AI, maybe it's just the influx of technology to our lives, maybe it's the way we live on our phones, maybe it's the way things don't feel so personal anymore. I wish that at the beginning of my career, I knew how important it was to just be myself and align myself to my values and sell aligned to my values. And I figured it out. I did it. But there was a lot of internal struggle to feel like I didn't have to fit this mold of what a salesperson is supposed to be. And I truly believe people are looking for authentic human connection, including in buying experiences. So it sounds really simple, but yeah, think about how you can bring yourself to the role and infuse sales with you versus a cookie cutter version of somebody else.
Fascinating. I wholeheartedly agree. Authenticity leads to integrity, which leads to trust, and that always leads to success. So I couldn't agree with you more. So you've done a lot of great things in your career, done a lot of different things as you've built that career over the years. If some of our listeners wanted to connect with you, LinkedIn, is that the best way for them to go and look you up?
LinkedIn is the best way to look me up. I tend to be pretty active on there, and find me on LinkedIn, connect with me. I'm happy to chat, and so appreciative of both of you in the conversation today. It's so much fun reconnecting with you guys, and I wish we could talk for a lot longer too.
Fantastic. Well, unfortunately, though, we do need to bring this episode to a close. I want to thank Sara for coming in and spending some time with us. I wanted to give Matt an opportunity to share some parting thoughts before we go and close the session out today. Any comments that you want to bring up, Matt?
I've known you since the very beginning of your career. I think at Unica, it's when I met you when you're just starting out, and it's just been a pleasure and delight to see how you've grown and where you are now. But it doesn't surprise me at all. So anyway, it's really nice reconnecting with you always, and I'm looking forward to when we can speak again.
Thanks, guys.
Absolutely. Well, that does wrap up our episode. Please give us a comment about what you heard today. And if you have any topics you'd like us to be covering, other types of shows, other types of themes, let us know as well. Either leave a comment on whatever channel you're listening to or reach out to us directly from our website. If there's something we can be doing, Matt and I, to help you, we're always looking to help. We can come out, do an assessment for you, or get even more engaged. Also, while you're on our website, if you'd like to purchase our book, Winning Faster, the MOVE Framework for Enterprise Software Sales Success, we do have a special going on right now this month until the end of February. We can get 25% off the e-reader PDF version. Details are down below. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for spending time in this session. Like, follow, subscribe, whatever it is you do on the particular modality you're watching us on today. And thank you very much for having shared some time. Sara, thank you for coming in to visit with us. It was terrific. Matt, sir, as always, fun spending an hour with you. I'm going to say my goodbyes now, and everybody else, we'll see you next week. Take care.